What is the best way to maximize your adaptation when you are a jumper or a sprinter? Well, in today's video, I'm going to tell you guys exactly how I go about maximizing the quality of the sessions that I have so that I am able to jump high and run fast consistently and improve over time. Oftentimes, you guys will hear the term fatigue thrown around and people don't really know what it is and they really don't know why it's important. The reason it's important is because if you're fatigued, then the quality of your sessions are ultimately going to go down. Now, if you're in an activity like jumping or sprinting, it's important to have high quality sessions because if you're performing at suboptimal levels consistently, then you're actually learning compensatory patterns, which might involve you sprinting slower or jumping worse. That ultimately compounds over time and then lead to poor performances when it counts. Especially if you're a high jumper, a sprinter, or a long jumper, it's incredibly important to be sure that you're absolutely at your best when it counts. And if you're practicing bad sessions consistently, then you're going to form bad habits that lead to bad marks in competition. Essentially, you're learning to be slow. And because we're doing something that is so neural and sensitive to fatigue, it's important to be functioning at maximal or near maximal levels. So here are 4 ways that I go about measuring fatigue to ensure that my athletes are performing at a high level or myself, I'm recovering appropriately from sessions. The first thing is HRV or heart rate variability. Now you guys are probably somewhat familiar with this. It used to be really popular with apps like Whoop or bands like Whoop. There are certain metrics that you can get. I think a ring called Aura will also measure HRV. There's an app that I used back in the day called HRV for Training, which I think is still active now, and you could do it on your phone in the morning, that will measure this metric called heart rate variability. Now, what you need to remember about heart rate variability is it's actually a measure of your parasympathetic nervous system. So what that means is your heart has a tonicity that is either upregulated or downregulated at rest. This is controlled by your parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system. So your parasympathetic nervous system is the brake pedal. And so the more variability you have in heartbeats, the higher your heart rate variability will be and the more on the brake you are. What that means is you're actually recovering specifically to aerobic stimuli more appropriately. Now that might seem a little bit counterintuitive because you're like, well, John, we do something that is, we're talking about neural activities. We do something that's fast, that's explosive. Why am I worried about parasympathetic nervous system and aerobic systems? I will agree with you. However, there has been newer research to show that distance running can actually be incredibly intensive on your central nervous system. So that brings you back to the parasympathetic nervous system and how maybe there's a relationship between your ability to recover to aerobic stimuli and your central nervous system. That's maybe one potential relationship between those two things. Now, we haven't seen concretely in research that there is a correlation or even a significant difference in your HRV scores and how you're actually jumping or sprinting. However, in my own experience, I've noticed correlations with what drops my HRV score and what will make me feel flat on the day that I need to perform, say jumping or sprinting. So if I, for example, stand for hours or I walk for a long time, my HRV scores typically will drop the following morning. Now, how you measure HRV again is by measuring your heartbeats and the distance between, or the time between the heartbeats. And as that time is more variable, let's say your heart went boop, 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 boop. That means that I have a high parasympathetic activity, I'm on the brake, and my body is in a rest and recover state. Now, my heart's beating, consistently. That means that I'm sympathetically innervated and my body is more in this fight or flight state. Another quick anecdote, I used to measure my HRV every single morning in 2017 when I was in grad school. I had the time to do it. It was easy, and I was curious if there were any correlation or relationship between my heart rate variability and my performance on the court or in the weight room. So I measured it each morning, and I went home for Christmas break, measured my HRV after walking around during Christmas time, shopping for my family members, and my HRV plummeted. It dropped all the way down just from walking around. Now, I had been measuring it every single day through the rigors of academic stress, through the rigors of training consistently each week, and my HRV scores were typically around 70 to 80, and then all of a sudden it dropped to 30 after walking around. Didn't drink alcohol, was eating regularly, I was adapted to the travel stress, dropped all the way down to 30. And then I jumped and performed horribly in the weight room that day and the following days after that. And that kind of showed me that there maybe isn't a direct correlation between those two things, but it is something that you can look at when you're trying to measure fatigue from training. The second thing that I would consider looking at to measure neural fatigue is actually going to be time to peak velocity. Now, what this means is how fast did you reach your peak velocity in a given reach, or how long did it take you to reach a peak velocity in a given lift? Some people will use this in sprinting, for example. How long did it take you to reach your max velocity? But we can also measure this metric in the weight room. There is a device called Encode, and this is something that Rolf Ullman and Randy Huntington have used for a period of time to measure this metric of time to peak velocity. They also have something called EA index and a couple other metrics that they use in conjunction with this, but time to peak velocity, assuming that your intent is very, very high, is a good measure of your nervous system's recovery. Now, why this works so well is because it's an indices to acceleration. Now, if you're just looking at peak velocity or you're just looking at wattages, you can actually have very high peak velocities and very high wattages and take a lot of time to get there. For example, if I'm a jumper who uses a really long ground contact time, then I might be able to jump decently high by doing so, maybe not as high as I've ever jumped, but the acceleration index was probably very, very bad, meaning it took me a long time to get there, and that is a strong indicator of your nervous system. Now, this metric is a little bit tricky to capture. There is a couple ways you can do it, and I will be covering this in a further video, but quickly, Encode works, GymAware works, and I believe there's something by the people that created Dynaspeed, Muscle Lab, I think is what it's called, is what Rolf uses, that will also measure time to peak velocity. The next two are maybe a little bit intuitive, and you guys have probably used these for years and years if you're watching this video. And the first one is going to be the quality of your jump sessions. Jumping is ultimately the thing that we want to improve at. And if you're seeing that the quality of those sessions is progressively dropping over time, that's a sign that you're probably fatigued. For example, I work with a jumper named Fabian. He is a Swedish high jumper. I've recently started coaching him, and he's been training super hard in the weight room and on the track for roughly 3 to 6 months. Now, throughout that, his jumping has actually progressively gotten worse week to week in practices, not necessarily in competition, but it's gone up and down. It really hasn't come back up. And so what that shows me as a coach is that he's probably very fatigued and he needs a lot of rest. Now, if you're a track and field athlete, you're used to training incredibly, incredibly hard. However, high jumpers and long jumpers are volume averse, meaning that they don't really like volume when you want to be jumping high. So what I'll do, and I've actually done this with another athlete, Nick Rossi, is I will tell them to take off completely, either a week or 2 weeks, and then typically what happens is their performance will slowly increase each subsequent week until they eventually have a drop off. I've also done this with Philip Vana, and it worked incredibly, incredibly well. So look at the quality of your jump sessions. If you notice you've been training hard and your quality is going down in those sessions, you're not having good sessions consistently, consider just taking off completely or doing things that are going to allow you to maximally recover. The fourth one is looking at your sprint times. If you're a jumper, sprinting is one of the things that you can do to improve your performance in jumping. The reason for this is because you have to have time to peak velocities that are very, very short. You have to be able to create a lot of force really quickly, reposition your limbs, and it is a totally neural activity, meaning your success in that event is dictated by your nervous system, which innervates your muscles, which allows you to produce force very, very quickly. So if you're measuring your sprint times and you're noticing that they're going up, meaning you're getting slower, then you probably need more rest. An easy way to do this is to use the Sprint Timer app or the MyJump2 app using the ground contact time function in the depth jump or counter movement jump section on that app. So there you have it, guys. If you want to recover from sessions, then you need to track your fatigue. There are 4 easy ways that you can track your neuromuscular fatigue and hopefully make adjustments to your training to allow you to bounce back and perform at a higher level, maximizing adaptation and thus your results. Thanks for watching, guys. If you're interested in getting coached by myself or Isaiah Rivera, go to teachmestrength.com and sign up for coaching today. Thanks for watching, guys.